So the first one that we're talking about tonight is designing and developing digital age learning experiences and assessments. Basically, it's trying to adapt and use technology more in your classroom to create meaningful learning experiences for the students, and in creating great assessments through technology resources.
I read the one that was dealing with K through 12 education, and there's a lot of different things that talk about how the kids are using more technology now than they are having face-to-face interactions or even being like in the front of the classroom. So being able to adjust your teaching standards to what is relevant to the students and what keeps them interested is something that we have to continue to do in order for the students to definitely learn or understand what we're talking about. So.
Well, you talk about the blended learning, and I read the Higher Ed 2016 Horizon Report, and it talked about how for the blended learning technology, to have that quick access that they're used to in their real life and bring that into the learning environment is one of the key things for the success of these kind of models.
Right.
Yeah, I read the 2017 Higher Ed one, and the two things that jumped out at me was one, rethinking the role of educators. And if I look at it, they were saying, educators need to start using digital learning resources and courseware and engage in online discussions and collaborative authoring. And all that is to kind of serve, Dawn, what you were talking about with tailored learning, right? That's more individualistic and more based on the student. And then the other thing I noticed in the 2017 report was talking about improving digital literacy.
Our next ISTE standard is the empowered learner, and basically it's just putting the educational thing in the student's court. One thing that came to mind reading this article, it talked about e-portfolios and having the students having the ability to go on Google Drive and write their reflections, and not just their reflections about how their days are going, but also about like particular lessons. So kind of like we try to do this particularly hit home when I was thinking of cross-curricular, because they want to do writing in every single subject. So like writing about math and writing about science and things like that, so that we can integrate it. And having the ability to do the e-portfolios does empower that learner, because they can talk about whatever they want.
From what I'm saying from the article, the 2017 Nordic article is talking about a lot of, having the students being empowered to do either blended learning, or a lot of it is like the online learning would start with apps. You start with easy mobile apps and things like that. The Finnish government, they're putting this as a timeline for 1 year or less. That's when they're looking to try to get this going. So it's crazy that's how they think that they can empower the students through giving them the technology and then giving them the options for blended learning.
Right.
One thing I always think is so interesting when we talk about implementing like apps into our classroom and implementing technology is like, what do we do with that data? And one thing that they talked about in the Horizon 2016 report is like, what do you do with that data after you get it? How do you use it to enhance your classroom? Because data is no longer just to show like, did students understand the concept, but it's to develop them, to help them set those goals. And how do you use it to advise the students on their goal setting? And how do you help them with their learning processes through that data?
Looking at the report for Higher Ed for 2017, the way that they integrated this empowered learner idea was in integrating formal and informal learning. So, they're trying to increase an interest in self-directed, curiosity-based learning, and it's with stuff that's available, that's out there, like lynda.com. I think all that meets these ISTE standards.
So the slide that I had is about coaching for technology, and my report for the Higher Ed 2016 really didn't cover much about coaching. What it did talk about, however, was for one of the challenges with personalized learning was the challenge to incorporate pedagogy and still include faculty in the development of the process. So from my point of view, like to have somebody coach you through that and help you with that process and to model it and to show you what it looks like in a classroom, it's really important to have an effective classroom.
Yeah, so I read the 2017 version of the Higher Ed report, and it really didn't cover coaching or the role of a technology coach for teachers anyway. I guess I wouldn't call it a miss, but I guess if you're looking at the ISTE standard, it just isn't represented there in that article set.
I know in the Nordic article, they actually are going a step further, and they're actually pushing as part of their pedagogy they're actually pushing all these different technology standards into their, practical teaching in everyday classrooms, so that they're pushing for, major changes in the culture and infrastructure. I mean, the article talked about adapting new pedagogies and technologies requires, big organization change, and it's involving the school leaders and teachers, working together to develop an open knowledge.
Yeah, and in the K through 12 article, like you guys said with the upper education, there's not a whole lot about the coaching, but it does say one thing about on-the-job training. It calls it on-the-job training, and it says that it often focuses on how to operate equipment without showing you how to effectively incorporate it into your instruction. So yeah, you actually know how to use it, but how do you know how to incorporate it so that it doesn't seem forced?
Okay, and the last standard we're going to talk about here is the standard for administrators, excellence in professional practice. In terms of the 2017 higher education report, it actually has several references to the different levels of administration, both at the sort of institutional level and at the governmental level. There's a whole lot in there about the government of Australia, the government of New Zealand. There's even a bit about HCC in there, but the administration doing a push for maintaining high levels of professionalism.
Yeah, definitely. It kind of talked about that in the K through 12 also. One of the things the article says is in order to facilitate authentic learning in their classrooms, school leaders need to be aware of what models and training strategies and resources exist to support this approach. So just, I think having the people who use the applications, just kind of like what you said, an adjunct thing. So if it's a mechanic and they're trying to do mechanic school, then it would help to have somebody who is a mechanic rather than just a teacher who has read a book about it, having that real world experience come in to use
the Nordic article I was reading talked about one of their 4 to 5 year time adaptations is like virtual and remote laboratories. So it talks about having teachers, set up to where the students are doing virtual labs where there's no actual equipment or chemicals, and so they're able to make the mistakes. And as the students run the simulations, the teachers can play back their videos and then, pinpoint exact mistakes that the students were making to help them develop, an understanding of where the exact mistake was made. And teachers set up, their own test videos that students can watch over and over. So they're pushing for more of, a safer environment where students can feel free to make mistakes and it's totally okay and no one's going to get hurt, or, there's no hurt feelings if there is a mistake, because the teacher is able to go back and tell them, in a good way, this is where the mistake was, this is how you can resolve it, and then the students can redo the experiment and retry it.
I think that's kind of neat too, because if it's, virtual rather than in person, then they don't feel as scared to make those mistakes because, nobody else knows except for your teacher.
Well, Stephen, what you were talking about with how they're rethinking kind of like the way that they handle stuff on campus. In my report for the Higher Ed 2016, it talked about how they're looking at incorporating a lean startup model for schools, and how they're looking at using an agile model, which I can't remember which one of you said you're in the project management course. But, it made me think of that because when you look at these schools and you look at how they're organized, in my opinion, there's always been kind of a different structure for education than in business. And so I think it's interesting that they're starting to incorporate that, and they're looking at more from an analytical standpoint where they're looking at the experience versus the formal content, and how can that be brought in together in an effective and efficient manner. So I think it's really exciting to see about what's on the horizon with education and the changes that they're making for the professional practices.
I think that's good too, just because if you think about it, there's not a lot of people who go into the educational field in the grand scheme of things. There's more people that are in the business world. So having them be able to learn those skills now rather than wait until after, I think would be more beneficial in the long run for us all.
Yep.
That's great. Well, that's the end of this discussion. Thanks again, everybody.
Bye. Till next time.
Bye.